I thought it would be a really good opportunity to talk on the topic of real estate marketing, because not only is it one of the most challenging, difficult industries to be in, because in theory, in a way, anybody can do it. But at the same time, it makes it very difficult to enter and be successful. It takes time, as you've heard previous speakers mention. It takes time to learn much more than just real estate. You do have to be your chief marketing officer. So you don't just have one job as an agent, you have multiple jobs. So in a way, you're running a full-fledged business, which of course you already know, but what I want to do is try to make marketing a little bit easier for you. I'm not here to convince you to be an influencer. I'm not here to convince you to put a camera in your face and do anything outside of your comfort zone. What I'm here to do is give you some ideas and give you some very basic steps that you can take with you starting next week or starting this evening to try and put yourself in a position to where you can get more clients. At the end of the day, that's literally all that really matters. That's why you're doing this, is to provide a living for yourself. I've had the fortune of working with literally hundreds of different businesses in many different industries and seeing all types of different marketing challenges. And marketing is not easy. Anyone who tries to convince you that it is either is trying to sell you something, or they just don't have the experience to know how difficult it really could be to do it for an extended period of time. Marketing is always changing. Marketing is ever growing. It's a constantly evolving thing. So it's not something that you learn once and then you're great at it. You have to continuously pay attention to it. You have to move with the market. You have to be open-minded. You can't shut down things that you think are just maybe not in your wheelhouse. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to put some ideas in front of you. Some of them you will like, some of them you will not like, and the idea is that you take a couple and you implement them. It's not setting, some huge bar, some difficult expectations for you to just revolutionize your business overnight. It's just never going to happen that way. Now, that being said, I'm a natural skeptic. I don't like to listen to people's advice. Some of you in this room might also be like that. So I figured what I'll at least do, I don't love talking about myself, but I think you should know who I am, what I do, and if you should listen to me or not. And that decision is ultimately up to you. But this is what my presentation is going to be today, which is building your brand. Every single person in this room has a brand, whether you feel that way or not, you do. When somebody hears your name or hears, kind of the name of your team or the company that you represent, of course you represent yourself as well, there's some sort of impression that comes along with that. So all this is figuring out how do we tweak that impression and make it as successful as possible, as good as possible, so that somebody wants to do business with you, somebody wants to work with you, and somebody wants to ultimately trust you to lead them in the right direction. It's easy to think that this is all about you. And I'm not saying you believe that, but it's easy to get caught up in your business and feel like, well, I need to position myself to always have the greatest first impression, which was talked about. But a lot of this is going to be focused on your customer. You're supposed to be the guide for them. People tend to make the mistake of thinking that they are the hero, right? Like if I'm a service provider, sometimes you get tricked into thinking like, oh, I'm the hero that's coming to save this person, right? When we think about branding, and the way that I think about branding and share with my clients is the customer is the hero. We are simply the guide. We are letting them save themselves, solve their own problems. We are just simply here to give them a helping hand and guide them in the right direction. So what we want to do today is figure out, how do we build your brand? How do we do that through creating great content? And how do we use that to then get more clients? It's as simple as that. Now, Matthew very quickly mentioned what I do, but so I run a marketing agency. We are ranked in the top 100 of all branding agencies in the country. I write and serve on the business council for Forbes. So I write about marketing, I write about social media, I write about content creation, and just business in general. Me specifically, outside of running an agency, I wrote a book titled Credibility Method. And the entire book is based on the idea of, how do I go from somebody who maybe doesn't have a business experience? Maybe I'm a new service provider, whether it's real estate, whether it's marketing, whether you're a plumber, the industry doesn't matter. How do you go from being somebody that's new at something and then saying, hey, I'm doing this, my goal is to be good at it, would you like to hire me? And then getting someone to actually say yes. How do you build credibility for your own name, your own brand, your company, and the service that you offer? And that is what this book is all about. This book is on Amazon. I would have loved to bring a bunch of copies for everybody. Unfortunately, I didn't have them printed, but you can order this book on Amazon. It's about 15 bucks, or the PDF is maybe 9 or 10. I've written for a lot of these publications here, but I'm also fortunate enough to be featured in some of these as well. When it comes to social media, it's a little bit weird to stand here and talk to everybody and be like, oh, I have a lot of followers, because in my opinion, that really is not important. It really doesn't matter. But when you do create good content, it's just natural. That's just what happens. People pay attention to it. People like it. They share it. They comment. And in a way, that is a very fortunate thing that has happened for me. But the important thing is that it's given me the experience to understand, like, why does that actually happen? Like, why does someone share a piece of content on social media? What provokes somebody to leave a comment on something that you have put out there? How do you overcome worrying about what your friends will think and what your family will think and maybe even what your clients will think? Maybe that's the part that maybe has you nervous about creating content. Maybe it's just that small barrier to where you know you should do it and it's always in the back of your mind. You're like, oh, I'll do it next weekend, or you maybe even have an idea, but just for whatever reason you just don't pull the trigger to do it. We're going to talk about some of these things, and I'm going to do my best to try to make you a little bit more comfortable with the idea of putting yourself out there. So through my experience on social media and just in marketing in general, some of these videos and some of this stuff on social media has millions and millions of views, thousands and thousands of comments. And there's a lot of pressure and, you know, like almost self-infliction when you start thinking about all these things and dealing with comments and understanding, like, does this person like me? What about this person? Or this comment's negative? And I'm here to tell you, like, none of that matters. It just doesn't matter at all. It's not important. It's a barrier in your mind that you think is important. But when you see how this impacts your business, the value and the reward of doing it is so much bigger than any of the little tiny negativity that comes along with it. And I do think that it can be very difficult for real estate specifically because of what I mentioned, which is there's a lot of real estate agents. I think the number you gave me was 1.7 million, right? 1.7 million agents in the United States. That's a lot. So here's the thing is, like, why wouldn't you put yourself out there? Because there's at least hundreds of thousands that are, right? We could easily say the majority aren't, but there's minimum tens of thousands, right? So what is really that frightening of just being one of those tens of thousands? And what if the reality was, well, in the beginning, maybe nobody will even see that content. You could see that as a good thing, or you could see it as a negative thing. Some people choose to see it as a negative thing. But we're going to talk about getting over these barriers and just putting yourself out there. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to put your face in front of the camera. It doesn't mean that you have to do what you see other, influencers or content creators doing. We're going to talk about ways to kind of create a gateway into maybe doing some of that stuff in the future if it's not something that you want to do right this second. Because there's great ways to make unique content. There's great ways to do things that other people aren't doing. And there's great ways to get around doing the things that you're not necessarily comfortable with yet. And I'm going to show you how to do those today. If you would like these slides, and I don't know if everybody can read this, but if you would like these slides, I've just created a little download link. It doesn't ask you for any information or anything. It's just a free download. If you would like to download these slides, look at them later, or even follow along in the back. If you want to pull them up on your phone so that you can see them a little bit better, you're welcome to do that. The link that is on here is my name, which is Myke Metzger, MykeMetzger.com/CB Elite. And that's just going to take you to a Google slide download to where you can get these slides. So I've put together this graphic, and what I'm attempting to do here is show you the different stages of what can happen over time when you create content. If we assume that we're all on the same playing field, where let's say today is day one of all of us together being a real estate agent. We are just a generalist, right? We may be licensed, we may have some passions, some things we're excited about, maybe we know the local area better than the next person, but for the most part, you're a generalist, right? Like you've signed up to do something that someone else could potentially do, which is become a real estate agent, right? The goal is to figure out how do we not only move up this ladder, but how do we also identify where on this ladder am I comfortable? Because not everybody in this room wants what I was talking about earlier. Not everybody is really, maybe someone just generally doesn't care, I don't love social media. I don't want millions of followers. I don't care to have thousands of comments. I'm just not interested in that. Would it help my business? Yeah, probably, but that's not who I am. That's not authentic to me. I don't want to do that. That is perfectly fine. That's actually a good thing. I think that you would generate more business by choosing to do what is natural to you and what is authentic to you, what you enjoy and what you like. And if that isn't social media, that is okay. But it doesn't mean that social media is not a business, an opportunity to grow your business. It doesn't mean that social media is not an opportunity to land more clients and even just have a better experience as an agent on your own, just learning and seeing what other people are doing and becoming better at the craft that you've chosen to do. So there are absolutely people in this room who would bump up to the next stage here, which is a specialist, and that's where they'll spend their entire career, and that's an amazing thing, and they'll be plenty successful, maybe even more successful than they could have ever imagined. There's no difference in the level of success in these top four kind of rungs on this ladder. The bottom is where I don't want you to stay. I don't want you to be a generalist. There's a reason that the majority of agents that get licensed never really do anything. They spend the money, they put a little bit of time into it, and then they realize like, oh, I'm not prepared to do this at all, or I'm just not good at it. And that's where we want to make sure that everybody avoids. Now, for the most part, probably everyone in this room is at this specialist level or above. But I think it's important to identify which one is your goal. Where do you want to be? Because if you say, okay, well, this is what I've identified as kind of the methodology of how I run my business, maybe I am comfortable putting my face in front of a camera and kind of getting out there, maybe talking about some of the challenges of the market for this year. Maybe I'm interested in talking about interest rates, and I'm comfortable and perfectly happy to sit down every Friday and make a little video and post it to Instagram or TikTok or something like that. That's a great thing. What I would consider that is some sort of influencer. I don't totally love the term influencer, but I don't really know what else word there is for it. Some people would call me an influencer. To that, I would say I have no comment. I don't know. But this is generally somebody who, you're putting content out there that maybe influences people's decisions, thoughts, actions in their everyday life, and obviously when it comes to hopefully doing some sort of business with you. Now, the next two are kind of where you reach a point where maybe not everybody's interested in this. I could make an argument that you should be, but at the same time, it really just isn't for everybody. Not everybody's interested in, turning their name into a logo and, having signs printed with their name on it. Not everybody wants to do that, and that's perfectly fine. But what I would call that is having a personal brand. Creating some sort of aesthetic and feel and genuine reputation around the word that is your name or potentially the name of your brand. And there's a lot of different ways, and of course, depending on different industries, that you could take this. So I have my agency, which is Stoked Marketing, and I try to not be the face of my brand. That can sometimes be challenging to do, but there's a time and a place, and there's different ways to approach this idea of branding. But if that is interesting to you, and if it's ever something that you've considered or thought of, or you've really enjoyed the idea of having some sort of aesthetic or brand design to who you are, what you represent, what you believe, there's a lot of differences between who people are. And it's great to be able to partner with a brokerage that is successful and gives you all these tools and these amazing things, but you can always have a look and a feel to who you are in addition to that, and that's a great thing. And a really good example of this would be maybe being faith-based, right? And Matt mentioned this, that can be part of what attracts people to you, and it could be what, attracts a certain type of client to you. And what we're gonna talk about in a little bit is being comfortable with the idea of letting clients go to create the space of opportunity for the right clients. The clients with the right budgets, the clients looking for the right properties, the clients with the right attitude, the clients with the right patience. Sometimes being so eager to just get business in general or work with anybody, we all have to make a living, of course. But I think what most people would find is if they were willing to say no when they know that they should say no, or when they're willing to maybe just draw a line in the way that they do business and force themselves to do business in a way that they enjoy, because this is your passion, this is what you're here for, this is what you do. Shouldn't you do it in the way that you want to do it? I think that you should. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, kind of the top rung here is being a thought leader. These are people who you're talking about, top of the industry, absolute world class, best at what they do. These are people who are posting on social media, millions of views, getting featured on some of these TV shows, whether it's HGTV or Bravo or whatever, right? These are like thought leadership. And whether or not you align with some of these people, which is totally besides the point, they've made it to that position. And they have tons of opportunity that comes that way because of that. Whether it's book deals, more clients, starting a brokerage, whatever that is what I would consider, fame and notoriety, thought leadership within your industry. You have to be a very particular person to even be interested in that. But this is kind of how I look at the roadmap of kind of personal branding, or just branding yourself as an agent, or just in general, regardless of what you do. So a lot of this starts with what I talked about, which is, what is your vision for being an agent? And I think this is something that people overlook pretty easily. They never really think about what am I actually trying to achieve? Whether it's 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And a lot of this goes back to that graphic that I just showed you. Thinking about, what do I want this to become? Because that's going to define the way that you do business with people. It's going to define the way that people think about you, look at the work that you do, the way that they feel about your credibility and your confidence to be able to deliver whatever it is that they're looking from you, whether they're selling a property, buying a property for their parents, whatever that might be. It's important to think about, like, what is my vision and where am I taking this? Where am I going? Because I'm essentially responsible. I'm the guide for this person to be the hero of their own life. How can I support them in their vision? And how can I support them in their story and let them kind of guide where they want to be on the roadmap of doing business with you? And if you don't know where you're going, you definitely can't guide anyone else anywhere. So you need to be very clear on what it is that you'd like to do with your real estate license, with this business that you have started, because it's your responsibility. Nobody's going to do it for you. So you have to learn marketing. You have to be aware of branding, even if you don't want to have a personal brand. Just understand that when you have a clear vision, people align with you. That's just how it works. And this comes down to like the very core of marketing. The reason that people don't buy products is because people aren't clear about what they're selling. And that goes for services as well. If you're not clear about what you offer, us as people, we are very prone to just ignoring things that are confusing. And this is why, you could think about whatever last big purchase you made. Like, you knew exactly why you were buying it, granted that it wasn't an impulse buy. I could even argue that if it was an impulse buy, it was because the marketing and the messaging was very, very clear, and it was easy to make a decision. Like, what we do when we cannot decide is the default is usually no. And that's why people give you objections like, I got to talk to my wife, or, oh, I'm not in the market, I got to get back to you, because they don't know how to tell you no. But that's because their answer isn't no, their answer is I don't know. But it isn't yes, right? The way that you can get them to drift a little bit further away from I don't know and towards a yes is by being very clear in who you are and what you say in your marketing and in your messaging and in the way that you communicate with your customers, your clients, your friends, your family. And this applies to your normal life. Just set real estate aside, even just in your normal life. People are attracted and gravitate to people who are clear and confident and know what they want. So if you can apply that to your own life and apply that to your marketing, of course, easier said than done, you will get further. More people will want to work with you. More people will refer business to you. You will generate more leads and you will make more money. Does that make sense? So here's just a couple, sentences, kind of piece of advice about really getting aligned with your mission, which mostly just an exaggeration of what I just said. But write your mission on one page. Keep it clear and simple. This will help you make any decisions moving forward. Whenever you come upon a point where you can't make a decision, you can then refer back to this page to help you determine if this is aligned with your mission. And it's easy to overlook this because in the beginning you want to do as much work as you possibly can. You want to have that opportunity to do business, land a client, make a commission, make a living for yourself and move forward and get better. But sometimes saying no, or sometimes making sure that you're efficient in the way that you do business with somebody, that gets you closer to your aligned mission. And it also ends up creating a better experience with the client. Because even though you're a service provider and somebody is hiring you, they're trusting you to guide them. And sometimes things get a little bit blurry and your client or your customer starts to try and guide you, right? So you have to find this nice, gentle, but firm balance in how you want to provide a service. And if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, then that becomes blurry and it isn't clear. So here are some things that you can ask yourself to kind of figure these things out, right? Because figuring out your vision, figuring out like what are the fun additions that I can add to my business to make it unique, to make people care about doing business with me, to make myself different in the market and make people be drawn to wanting to work with me versus any other, random agent. That can be hard to figure out. So here's some questions that can help you. So one would be, what are your passions? So something like that could be faith-based, or maybe you love, like for me, I love living in the city. I live in Richmond. I love being in that area. Now, granted, I'm not a real estate agent, but I would probably find a way to include my passions about the things that I enjoy doing in the city, whether it's mountain biking or visiting restaurants or going to places that have fun cocktails. And I know that you guys already know about these things. I know many of you are already doing these things, but it doesn't mean you can't double down and really, really be that much better than anyone else who's trying to do that. I firmly believe it's actually not that hard to be really just significantly that much better than the next person that's trying to do that. It just takes a little bit more effort. It's really not that hard. but chances are you're busy and you just maybe haven't taken a half hour to think about this. And I promise you that really is all it takes. A half hour, an hour, sit down and ask yourself some of these questions. What do you value most in life? What are your natural character traits? What are your actual skills? Sit down and be honest with yourself and think, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? If you're not really sure, try to find a close friend or a family member. I know that that can be tricky in itself. And ask them, genuinely, just be honest with me. When you think of me, what do you think I'm good at? Do you think I'm a good listener? Do you think I'm a good artist? Do you think I am great at just making good decisions? Do you think I'm a good driver? Just what is it? And maybe you go from person to person and ask a few different people and try to get a rough idea of what are your strengths as an individual? What are your weaknesses as an individual? And I can guarantee you that that will make you help make better decisions in your business and as an agent. Who do you want to help, right? In the beginning, probably anybody, for the most part. It's like, I'll help anybody. If somebody came to me and said, hey, I'm looking for a house, probably your first instinct is not to say no. But over time, you might find that you really enjoy working with particular people. And I don't mean particular types of people, I mean specific parts of the market. Maybe it's empty nesters, maybe it's young people, maybe it's people specifically looking to shop for homes for their parents who are entering the later years of their life. Maybe that's your market. Maybe it's specific people who want to live in a part of town that you like to specialize in, right? And I know that these are basic concepts, but when you nail these down and you really start to string and connect these things together, this is what creates your brand. People don't work with me and my company as a marketing agency because we do everything. They work with us because we're really good at a couple things, and that's why they work with us. Now, I have lots of opportunities to say yes to services that I could make money on, but I know deep down, because I've made these decisions and I've asked myself these questions, that the answer should be no. I know it will take me more time to work with a certain type of client than if I just said no and waited for the right client. And my purpose today is not to tell you to say no to clients. It's not really what I'm saying. And I do know that real estate is a little bit different than something like marketing. I understand that. But these are just things to think about. And I'm sure maybe some of you, and I heard Matt say this, just obviously he's being, joking and friendly, but just talking about a client that's maybe sort of a pain in the ass, right? Like a lot of people have experienced that. You guys know what that's like. And I'm sure afterwards you think like, I bet I would have saved a lot of time, effort, and emotional integrity if I would have just said, hey, maybe this isn't a good fit. I would actually encourage you, maybe find somebody who could help you in a different way, however you want to approach that. Is this a long-term or a short-term mission? Be honest with yourself and figure out, what exactly am I doing? What am I trying to accomplish? That'll help you determine how serious you are about this. And if you think back and you say, you know what, this is my life. This is my only option. In my opinion, that's how I feel like I've at least attained a little bit of success, is because my back was against the wall. So I knew that I was 110% in on marketing. It was my only shot. I had to do this to figure out how was I going to create a life for myself. Sometimes the thing that can stop you from being successful in your industry is that you have other options. It's comfortable to maybe not put in the extra work. So you have to convince yourself, is this my long-term mission? And am I willing to really put in the extreme amount of effort that it takes to be successful in this field? The last question here is, how many people will join your personal mission on day one and help you grow? Maybe there are people who are holding you back. Maybe there are people who are saying, hey, Stacy, I don't really know about this real estate thing. Have you thought about going back to school? Have you thought about doing this? They want to see you in a way not pursue what you're trying to do. And that may not be the case for many of you, but it's easy for friends and family and random people who are looking in from the outside to discourage you from building a brand. Maybe you feel that that's what you want to do, but you're not comfortable with the idea of positioning yourself as an important person, positioning yourself as somebody that has credibility in your field, that you're an expert on your specialty, your topic, your field. Maybe that's just uncomfortable to you, but maybe it has nothing to do with you. Maybe it has to do with people on the outside kind of peering in and looking at what you're doing, and there's just some nerves there, and you just don't know where to start. One of the first ways that you can start is by determining who is your target audience. I think you guys have heard a little bit about this already today, just kind of determining, what is your angle? What is your angle? Is it that, you want to specialize in featuring, restaurants and just saying, I love helping people explore and understand the enjoyable activities and things that they can do in my city, in my town, in this zip code, in this area. What are those things, and how can I double down on that? Sure, you could talk about the park down the road. Sure, you could talk about the farmer's market down the street. But do you want to do everything, or do you want to pick the passions that you've identified earlier and align that with how do you add that as a strength on top of your real estate business? Does this make sense? And that is how you determine your target audience, because when you decide the marketing and the messaging and the ideas and the passions and the story that you want to put out there, it is inevitable that you will attract those people. There was a slide earlier that said, like it's not realistic that on your first touch point, someone's going to become a lead and say like, hey, can you show me the properties that you have available? Like that's not going to happen in the beginning. It's going to happen after there's maybe 7 to 9 or 10 touch points with an individual. And some of those could be through social media. Some could be through running into someone at the grocery store. Some of those could be through, a high school reunion. It could be anything. It could really be anything. So how do you create an excuse to make that touch point with somebody in a way that's not annoying and hard for you to do? So if you love restaurants, wouldn't it be great if you added that on top of your business and really doubled down on all the amazing restaurants in the area and found a way to connect with other people who really enjoyed going out? People who enjoy going out and go to all these restaurants also happen to be people that normally have disposable income and can afford to do that all the time. There are also people that would love to probably meet with you for lunch and go try a new place. These are all things that I didn't even mention real estate, right? So like your business is just the people business. So why don't you take people and your passions and connect them and figure out what type of sphere of influence and what type of people you can create to be your pool of leads, essentially. And that is what I would consider your niche or your target audience, because what you do is what's going to attract the type of client that you're inevitably going to work with. And if you haven't identified these things, that's why those clients aren't there, or that's why you may have difficulty getting as many clients as you would like to have. Does that make sense? If you want to grow, you must become great within your niche. When defining your niche, be as specific as possible. A generalist, like we talked about earlier, will find it hard to grow because people don't know when to rely on them for advice. They don't know what type of advice you can give them. So using the restaurant example, doesn't it make sense that if you put yourself out there, and now don't everybody go become restaurant experts, okay? Pick your thing. But wouldn't it make sense that over time, after being consistent with that example, maybe it's cocktails, maybe it's outdoor activities, maybe it's hiking, kayaking, whatever it is, right? Wouldn't it make sense that somebody would then reach out to you and say, hey, I really need a restaurant, recommendation for a date that I'm going on. Hey, could you tell me where could I go to go kayaking? Because this is something that you do all the time. You're an outdoorsy person. You like hiking and kayaking and mountain biking, and maybe that's your thing. Well, now you're including that into your business and still doing something you enjoy and love, and ultimately you get better at it because then people align with you for those things. What goals do you need to set? What steps do you need to follow to reach your goals? And whom do you need to learn from, work with, or partner with to turn these goals into reality, right? So maybe you don't have all the information that you necessarily need to accomplish the example that I just gave you. Maybe you've always been excited about being more active, more fit, but you need to accomplish that yourself before you start talking about it. Maybe that's how you feel. Well, how can you now add that as a part of your routine in your business? Maybe every Thursday is your day that's dedicated to doing that one extra curricular type of activity that needs to also be included in your business. Well, maybe you need to find the person that can help you do that. Maybe it's hiring a guide to take you on the rapids and show you what you need to know, and then that becomes your hobby because it's already something you always wanted to do. But now that's something that you start including in your story and the messaging and maybe your stories on Instagram, just simple things. It doesn't have to be above and beyond. And now this becomes something that you're including and just an excuse to connect with people, right? People like people. People don't like just promotions and pictures of houses, You need to find a way to make it creative, to make it interesting, and to provoke a reaction or some sort of something out of someone, right? Finding that connection with them. Determine your point of difference. So this is very similar to what we just talked about, so we won't spend too long on this, but pick your thing. Pick your thing. For me, I'm covered in tattoos. A lot of people ask me for recommendations on artists and shops that I go to. If I was a real estate agent, I would probably talk a little bit about that on something like Instagram, maybe even talk about different shops and say, hey, this shop is over in Northside. And again, I've been to Fredericksburg plenty, but I'm not as familiar with the market here, so I'll just use Richmond as an example. I could say, hey, well, this shop is featured over in Northside. Here are the really cool things about Northside is it's now being developed. There's a lot of growth opportunity here. It's a little bit more affordable than a place that's already developed. And again, I'm not a real estate expert. These are basic things, but a lot of people don't know this information. But now I'm using something like my passion or just a topic that I already know a lot about, which would be tattoo shops or tattoo artists or different styles of tattoos, and using that as a gateway to talk about something like the neighborhood that this shop is located in. Does that make sense? So determine your point of difference. And this will determine how you will come across as being different from everyone else fighting for the quote unquote, top position in your area. Assuming that you're perfectly capable at what you do and can provide genuine help to your audience, what is your point of difference? And if you're sitting there thinking like you're not really sure, this is when you need to rewind, think about some of these questions that I've mentioned. I'll go back to that link for you to download the slides at the end of this, and we'll also do a Q&A if we have time. So we can kind of dive into this a little bit deeper as we get towards the end of this. Next piece is build your online assets. This part is pick and choose. This may not be for everybody. There are amazing tools at your disposal. These are not things that you need to do. These are just things that you could do. So we'll just very briefly cover them. If you are somebody who feels like you should have, some sort of aesthetic, to your brand. Now, of course, I run an agency, we do logos, branding, all that type of stuff. But if you just wanted to come up, even let's say you needed a QR code to do something specific that you wanted to do. Let's say you wanted to record a video that just introduced yourself to your potential clients, and you wanted to be able to have that on a QR code, and you needed somebody to create a QR code for you. These are, Upwork, Fiverr, these are great places where you can get somebody to do that for you for like $7, you know what I mean? So these are just some quick little simple resources that you can maybe use for certain circumstances if you needed to. At the bottom, very quickly mentions Instagram. I would imagine everybody here is probably on Instagram, I would imagine, right? We'll also talk about TikTok. I'm curious to see your guys' thoughts on that. The next piece is having a content plan and a schedule. This is probably the hardest part of all of this, because not only do you need to come up with ideas, you have to be consistent, and you have to actually put in the time and effort to post content if you want to. Now, a lot of people think of content as, having to do what, the influencer or the thought leader does, which is put my face on camera and talk about things. And, if that's not natural and that's not you, like we talked about earlier, you shouldn't be doing that. I really don't think you should be doing that. I think instead, there are other ways that we're going to talk about that you can create content and still put yourself out there in a way to where you're providing value to your potential audience, but also finding, again, 1 out of those 10 touch points with potential leads, potential connections, and just people that you can begin to build a relationship with. So here are some ideas. There's a lot more than this, and what we're going to do here shortly is actually like a little exercise where I'm going to go through this specifically with somebody, and so you can actually see what the process might look like when you sit down to do this for yourself. So that way you don't just have to look at slides, you don't just have to listen to me like talking about theory. We're actually going to go through and do some of this so that you actually have steps to know what to do first. But these are some ideas that we'll go through very quickly. Of course, you can educate people, talk to the camera, talk about interest rates, what's changing over the next 18 months, what's the difference between a fixed rate, what's the difference between, you can talk about these things. And you might think that they're too basic, but what if it was, one video or one piece of content away from finding your next client? Wouldn't you do it then? So a lot of the information that you could talk about in this field, yes, it already exists. But how can you take it and make it unique to you, put your own spin on it, and find your point of difference to add on top of it? That's all content is. There's a lot of great books on the idea that like nothing is original. I agree with that. Like most things that you could say or do have already been said or done by most people. There's very few people in the world that have like done something that no one else has done. So it's okay to take an existing idea and kind of curate it and figure out how could I implement this on my own and make it unique and make it fun. Plenty of people are talking about the perks of certain neighborhoods. Well, I'm in a unique position with the example that I gave you of the tattoo piece, so that's maybe my unique thing. So really take some time to think about strengths, weaknesses, what's unique, what are your passions, and how can you put a spin on some of these ideas and maybe use some of these ideas here. So another one would be Like I gave this whiteboard animation idea, you know. Have any of you ever seen those kind of like overhead videos of somebody maybe sketching something out on a piece of paper or something like that? Maybe that's how you think. Maybe you're a visual learner and that's how you enjoy learning a new topic or information. Well, how can you take something like real estate, or how could you take something like the different zip codes in your area, different neighborhoods, different features of different neighborhoods and different areas? How could you actually draw that out and make it fun, make it visually interesting? How could you do that? That could be an idea. And maybe it doesn't involve you showing your face at all. Maybe it doesn't even involve you talking. Maybe it's just music with little subtitles on it. It's a very simple idea. Some of the other ones, these are a little bit more involved, you know, doing something like vlogging. Like this is a commitment. But there's some of you in this room who might be thinking, well, I do want to do that. And I am comfortable in front of the camera, or I want to be comfortable in front of the camera. I know I need to do this. I want to do this. And maybe something like having a vlog or a YouTube channel is something you want to do. Or maybe you're looking at other agents out there and thinking, man, I could do that. How does this person's video or how does their content have all these views, all these comments? I could do that same thing. That's so simple and that's ridiculous, right? But do we let our, you know, kind of arrogance, if you will, stop you from doing that? Or does that fuel you to say, you know what, maybe this isn't as difficult as I'm making it out to be. Maybe I should try some of these things and get out of my comfort zone. Things like quotes, infographics, you know, sharing things like market reports, or maybe, you know, whatever it is that can display data in a way that is visually, you know, interesting. Of course, you can always do that. I am familiar with BrandServe, and there's great assets and great graphics and things back there that are already ready for you to use. So then the question becomes, do these things already exist and you're just simply not doing them? That might be a question that you need to ask yourself. And ask yourself, why am I not doing these things? Personal stories of vulnerability. Now, I'm not the greatest one at this either. You know, maybe most of us probably aren't. But finding a way to be as open, authentic, vulnerable with people as possible is always going to create the best connections. And that's aside from real estate. You know, the best relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, are through people who are just unapologetically themselves, right? So how do you also apply that to marketing? I would guarantee you that if any of you went to your Instagram profile right now and clicked on who you were following, and you looked at the people that you enjoy observing and watching their content, you know, and you get stuck scrolling through some of their stuff, it's because they are unapologetically themselves in almost all cases. They don't hide their personality. They don't hold back because of what people think about them. Now, that's a really hard thing to accomplish. Like, that's not easy at all. But the question is, are you somebody who wants to do that? And that's a challenge that you want to take on yourself, because that is the purest form of marketing. If you think of some of the greatest marketing campaigns in the world, the sad thing is they're normally alcohol, insurance, and like boring industries like this, right? They're promoting products that like maybe aren't the most interesting, but their marketing is stellar. And it's because they know what they're saying to their audience. They know their message, right? So find a way to take your passions and use them to be unapologetically yourself, and naturally you will have more eyeballs on you and what you're doing and what you're talking about. Of course, there are pros and cons to that, but these are maybe some ways to do that. Some simple ones on the right-hand side would be some photo ideas behind the scenes and documenting what you're doing. Maybe you're setting up for an open house. I know that that's busy. I know that sometimes there's a tight timeline on getting everything together, and it can be hectic, and people show up early, and whatever that thing might be. But could you take an extra 2 minutes to maybe just kind of document what you're doing and put it out there in a way that provokes some interest in a way? I think that you should challenge yourself to do that if you aren't already doing that. Documenting an experience, something like carousels and being fun with those types of content can be great ways to put yourself out there and just to put content out there. In the beginning, it's just doing it. It's not making it perfect. I'm a very strong believer that done is better than perfect. And that's after a very long time of kind of battling with being a perfectionist and holding back from wanting to put things out there because I'm like, oh, no, like it needs to be perfect. Some of the most viral pieces of content that I've ever created are the ones where I'm like, okay, it's not perfect, I'm just gonna post it. And those are the ones that are the most successful. There are times that I've taken like days trying to get something exactly how I want it, and then I post it and it flops. You know, and a flop to me might be different than a flop to you, but it just depends. It depends on what your expectations are and what you're trying to do. So you'll find that success comes when you just let go of the result. And the greatest thing is when you do that, you're doing it because you want to do it and the results don't matter. And the more you do that, inevitably, and funny enough, you'll end up getting more results over time. That's just how it's going to work. The reason you stop doing it, the reason you don't post on content, if that is you in this room, it's because you're focused on the result rather than why you're doing it. When you can align yourself with why am I doing this, you'll find that you'll get more results because you're not focused on the result. You're doing it because you're being genuine, authentically, and unapologetically yourself, which again, is the purest form of marketing. All marketing is messaging. So what is your messaging? And if your messaging is confusing, your marketing is confusing. And if your marketing is confusing, what you're doing as a business owner, what you're doing as an agent is confusing. And if what you're doing as an agent is confusing, the experience with your client is confusing and not as good as it could be. And if that's the case, you're getting less referrals, it's taking you longer to get a transaction done and do business with that person, you're less organized, and you're not as effective as you could be as an agent. So it all comes back to, is your messaging clear? Do you know what you're doing? Have you thought about these things? Have you thought about what is the message and the activity that I'm putting out there? Some other ideas down here are guides, which I'll show you an example of what a guide is in a moment, and even things like podcast interviews. I forgot to put this in one of my slides, but if you'd like to write this down, or I'll give you guys my email address at the end, and if you have any questions about this, I'll try to answer you guys. If you need my help in the next couple of days, just shoot me an email, and whatever your question is, I'll try to get back to you. But there's a website, it's called radioguestlist.com. And what it is it's a directory that connects people who have podcasts with people who want to be on a podcast, right? So now you're not going to be in front of millions of listeners, right? But let's say, somebody in Fredericksburg has a cool little local podcast. And again, this is going to be a national thing, so it's not always going to be in Fredericksburg or in your area. But going back to my book and what we talked about earlier, it's all about increasing your credibility. So if you're able to just get in front of somebody who has a small podcast with maybe 200, 300, 400 listeners, gets you out of your comfort zone, gets you familiar with listening to yourself speak. It challenges you to talk about the topic that you feel that you're an expert at, and it ultimately makes you better. And you now have the added benefit of saying, hey, I've been featured on this podcast. You now also have the added benefit of maybe sharing that interview on your social media, and it's an excuse to start putting content out there. So radioguestlist.com is a really cool resource if you guys would like to check it out. So that was that last one there, podcast interviews. So myself and we, meaning my agency, our belief is twice a week is a good place to start, just posting, but it could be less than that. It could be once a week. I don't always post, I don't post 10 times a week either. It's not necessarily always about quantity in the beginning. It's just about getting comfortable with posting content and seeing what you enjoy and what you like to do as an individual through your social media if this is something that you're interested in doing. Very quickly, how to create a good caption. These are something where we don't need to spend a lot of time talking about this because if you download the slides, again, I'll give you a link. I'll give you the link again at the end so that you can download this. This is almost something that you just want to reference back when you are posting on social media. You always want to think about what do people respond to, right? Because it can be easy to get caught up in things like likes and followers. I can tell you from years of doing this, that doesn't matter. Things that are much more important are comments and people sharing your content. There are times when there are a lot more shares and comments than you would ever expect on a piece of content because you can't always, especially the shares in particular, you can't always see those metrics. But when you're the one behind a piece of viral content, it becomes very clear that the thing driving the eyeballs and the thing driving, likes and followers is people sharing your content. So then the question becomes, okay, if that's how I'm growing an audience, how and why are people sharing my content then? And that's the question you have to ask yourself. It's not, is somebody scrolling by and seeing a pretty picture of a house and are they liking it? Sure, that might happen. How could I take that same picture or walkthrough video and add some flavor to it to provoke somebody to share it? And so a good example of that, and the very first one there is just ask a yes question. And it sounds silly, but asking very obvious questions that people they feel like this urge to answer it is such a great way to encourage engagement. So let's say you have a listing, it's a beautiful place, you have an open house set up. Here's such a simple idea, which would be just creating a quick video, just showcasing the property, posting it, and saying, could you ever see yourself living in a place like this? Do you know somebody? I mean, it could be so ridiculous. It's like, if this house were free, would you take it? It's interesting, it's provoking. It's like, will some people answer it? No, but some people will. And if you just posted maybe a picture of the house, maybe nobody would ever comment on it. Social media is barbarically simple, so don't overcomplicate it. And once you get in the habit of understanding how to encourage people to engage with your content, it'll start to click. Have any of you ever seen, like an Instagram reel or a video that has like written subtitles on it, and the obvious word in the subtitles is actually spelled wrong or spelled incorrectly? Has anyone ever noticed anything like that? So there are a lot of content creators that do that on purpose. They will purposely spell something in the subtitles wrong because they know someone will comment on it to say, you spelled such and such wrong. Now, that may not be the greatest example specifically in the real estate field. You want people to think you're competent, obviously, so you don't want to trade off oh, well, this person might think I'm an idiot because I'm spelling things wrong. So it's not that example that's important, it's how that works that's important, right? So replace that with whatever else you want. It could be placing a funny little decoy in a video. If that's your style and you're known as kind of a funny comedic person, build that into your flavor of how you do business and how you engage with people. You want it to be fun. You want it to be funny. So maybe you have a fun, little trinket that you just hide in all your videos, and it becomes this fun thing. And maybe it just starts with your friends and family, and they say, oh, I saw it. It was on the mantle over here, and that just becomes this funny little clever thing. And it doesn't really have anything to do with real estate, but what it does is it creates engagement, and engagement fuels these social media algorithms to then show your content to more people, because comments and shares and engagement is what does it. Does this make sense? Reveal you have been there. So this is back to being vulnerable, being open, connecting with your audience. Call out your discovery, right? What is your solution to solve a certain problem? So by identifying a problem that your potential client has and then offering a solution, that can also drum up conversation sometimes. And then of course send them to do something. This could be a monthly giveaway that you do. Every month you give away an Amazon gift card, or you give away some sort of local experience in your area, whether it's, oh, this month, and again, I'm not 100% familiar with everything there is to do in Fredericksburg, but let's say there's a cool zipline course, hey, I'm giving away a pass for 2 people to go do this. All you need to do is comment, share this video, things like that. Again, it's drumming up engagement and getting that content to be seen by more people. And what this ultimately does in the end is build social proof for yourself. The thing is about content, and this isn't always the case, but a lot of the times when you find people who are creating content and they're followed by a lot of other people and they're engaged with by a lot of other people, you tend to look at that as okay, this person is established in their field. Because why else would anybody be engaging with their content if they weren't? Why else would that be happening? Why else would somebody be leaving? Why would there be dozens or hundreds or thousands of comments on this piece of content of maybe, a walkthrough of a beautiful backyard landscape with, maybe a caption that's kind of talking about the fun features back there and why it adds value to your home? Well, why would tons of people comment on that and be engaging with the person who originally posted it if it wasn't a good piece of content? And then ultimately that ends up being a reflection on you because you posted it. And you created it. You wrote the caption, you took the video, right? Maybe that's not always the case, but it is the case a lot of times. Does this make sense? Call to action. So I'm sure many of you already know what that is, but here are some simple ones. What's your blank, right? So, we'll go with the landscaping, option again. You could say, maybe take a cool little video and post it as a reel on Instagram showing off, a beautiful backyard landscape. And you could say, just a quick example off the top of my head, I'm sure I could come up with a better one if I had more time, but maybe asking, what type of yard would you prefer? Would you prefer sod, a clover yard? Do any of you know what that is? They're really, really beautiful, clover or turf. What would you pick? What are you interested in? What's your choice, you know? Or what does your dream backyard consist of? Are you a garage person or a carport person? Hot tub or pool? Things like this, right? You're asking opinions from people, right? You're focusing on your customer and you're just giving them fun things to engage with, but you're ultimately guiding them towards a vision of being a homeowner or potentially selling their home. And of course, when someone sells a home, they got to go somewhere, so they got to buy another one most likely, right? So it all eventually plays into growing your business. Who else loves blank, right? So this is an easy one. There's all kinds of homes that you probably see. And I do know that this is kind of focused on maybe the buyer's side, but even if you're featuring a listing that you're representing and you want to try to get that property sold, of course, featuring certain pieces of that property and then finding ways to get engagement. Now, what probably holds a lot of people back is you've probably done a lot of this before and maybe nobody engages with it. But when you align it with what we talked about earlier, you'll start to see that you'll get some traction, and then it's just a matter of being consistent and doing it on a recurring basis. Some other quick ones: what is your favorite blank? Who does this already, right? Like, what this means is, maybe this isn't property specific. Trying to think of you want to think of habitual examples of people in their home. Like, what is something that people always do in their home? Is it, like fluffing their pillows before they have friends over, and you make a funny little video doing that before your open house. You're fluffing all the pillows and getting it perfect for your open house. Like finding clever ways to relate with people. Again, you'll have to give me a break because I don't have a lot of time to think of examples, and I want to get through this so that we can get to kind of the little exercise that we're going to be doing. So these are some examples, right? Head over to blank, which could be a restaurant, right? Head over to this place to try out their new blank, their new margarita, whatever it is, And here's 3 little things you maybe didn't know about the surrounding area or the neighborhood next door. Hashtags, I'm basically just going to tell you about a really neat tool that I like to use. This is called displaypurposes.com. This is a really neat website. Literally all you have to do is just type in a relative word and it'll give you a bunch of related hashtags, and it will actually mix up the interval of hashtags for your piece of content, meaning it'll give you 5 that are ranking on photos that have minimal engagement. It'll give you 5 hashtags that are ranking on content that have pretty good substantial engagement, and then it'll give you 5 more that are ranking on the most popular content on social media. And that's really effective because it gives your content the chance to, you've got multiple shots at success, right? Like you may rank on a smaller hashtag, or you may get lucky and you may rank on a bigger one and end up on the Explore tab on these social media profiles. So this is just a really cool way to grab hashtags. It's quick, it's effective, and you don't have to sit down and think about it. You can just go here, copy some, paste it onto your post if you'd like to. Now, you don't always have to use hashtags. I'm not somebody who's going to convince you to use hashtags, but if you'd like to, if you find it effective, I would encourage you to try it. Okay, creating your mission statement. This is going to kind of bring this all together in a circle here. This is a very quick way to sort of identify who you are and what you do. It's simply, I help blank do blank so that they can blank, right? And that's really it. And if you think about, again, giving the examples of some of the best, companies in the way that they display their marketing, this is going to align with all of them. So this sentence here at the bottom says, I help, and that blank is filled by whoever your ideal client avatar is. Do blank, so that's the result you want to get them, of course. What is their desired outcome? So that they can blank, right? What is their purpose? And so you might think, oh, so that they can buy a new home, or so that they can sell a new home. But I want you to take it a step further than that. And so what I've done for this one is I did put together an actual example. And there's a lot of different ways that you could use this kind of framework to come up with your own examples. But the one that I came up with was, I help growing families save time and money in a challenging market so they can find their dream home and get back to living and loving life. Does that make sense? So I'll give you just a quick kind of thought on how I think about this. So when I think about growing families, right? If I was an agent, the reason that I would do this, and here's an example of how this would be used. This would maybe be the statement on the back of your business card. This may be the headline of your website. This may be the bio description on your social media profile. So in Instagram, where you have a little bio, it doesn't just say real estate. I love my husband. It says much more than that. You're speaking to your audience without saying, hey, hire me as a real estate agent, right? It's different than that. You're going beyond the surface to connect with people in a way where they can clearly identify themselves with this or not, right? And we'll talk about this in a second of why it's important to identify this and not get hung up on who this isn't addressing, okay? So growing families, maybe my specialty is I really enjoy working with young, beginning families, people who are just kind of starting their lives. They've got solid careers, they're just having kids, they're looking for their first or second property, and that's what I'm passionate about. It's growing families. I'm happy and excited to help you take that next step in your life and find the place that, it may not be your forever home, but it's gonna be the place that you're at for a while your family is growing, and that's what I specialize in, and that's what I'm excited about because I work with families just like you, okay? That's what I mean by growing families. Save time and money. Who doesn't want to do that? I want my time to be used efficiently, and I want to keep as much money in my pocket as I possibly can. Everybody can align with that, right? In a challenging market, I think we can all agree that just times in general are very weird, but also the market is weird, right? So in a challenging market, you're addressing the problem, okay? You're not avoiding the problem and saying, no, everything's fine, I'll help. Saying, no, this is challenging, but that's actually why you want to work with me. Do you want to work with someone who's not addressing the challenges? Or do you want me to tell you, absolutely this is challenging, but that's actually the reason you should work with me. It's because I'm familiar with this. And this is specifically what I want to do and what I'm trying to do for you, right? And then the last piece, you're literally painting the vision for them. You're saying, find your dream home and get back to what's important, which is living and loving life. And that's what I'm passionate about. That's what I want to help you do. Yes, in the process and in the meantime, we're going to help you sell your home or find your dream home. But I want to focus on that next chapter, and that's what this whole experience is going to be together. And then, how do you find things to add into your service to make this a true statement? You know what I mean? Is it, some sort of just, welcome gift that you give to all of your clients focused on growing families? Whether that's, fun activities for the kids to do. And these are things that cost money. You may spend a couple $100 doing this for every client, but that's running a business. You have expenses to run your business. And this is what I said earlier about it's not that hard to be better than all of the rest. You're just choosing not to do it because it's uncomfortable, right? So spending $250 to $500 on every lead you ever get is probably not very comfortable. And I'm not saying you have to do that, I'm just giving you an example. Even $10 is better than $0, right? But if you go down and you set that as the expectation, isn't that what everybody's doing? Hey, let's meet for coffee. Everyone's doing that. So how do you take that to the next step and do something different so that people will remember you, refer their friends and family to you? And that is what creates this compound effect. And all of a sudden in a year or 2 years from now, when you implement these things, all of a sudden you got tons of business. Make sense? So that is what this statement means. Very quickly, 80-20. Is anybody familiar with the Pareto principle? And if not, that's okay. So Pareto principle is basically just saying almost everything falls into 80-20, right? So let's say you have 100 clients and you're the person that I just gave you the example of with me, right? You're that person. You're helping growing families, you're addressing the challenging market, and you're very passionate about helping people get through this process in a challenging time and getting them back to living and loving life and doing activities with their kids and just getting back in the rhythm after they're, relocating basically. If you have 100 clients over whatever time period, you want 80 of them to be those people. 20 of them might not be. The other 20 may be somebody who doesn't fall into that category. But when you double down and you purposely identify your market and who you are in the market, those 20 will come anyway because you're determining your credibility, your reputation, your results, your reviews that you're getting from clients, just your overall experience is all determined by the 80%. The mistake is that people end up just doing 25, 25, 25, 25, and it's all random and their messaging is not clear, and none of it is benefiting the other category of clients that you have. When you really focus on who is my 80%, who do I want to work with, that 80% will fuel the other smaller category, the 20% of the other clients that maybe don't fit into that market. It will fuel all that because your reputation is built off the majority of your clients. I love the entire concept of the Pareto principle, so if this is an interesting concept to you, definitely just on your own time, just look it up and just get familiar with it. There's a lot of really great books on this concept. This, I'm not going to go through these. If you'd just like to take a picture of this, or again, I will share the link again at the end so that you guys can get this list here. These are just tools, pieces of software, things that I like in my everyday life that help me create content. Okay, where should you be spending your time? Instagram and TikTok. This is my opinion. Doesn't mean you have to do it. This is my opinion. How many of you have made at least one post, just a single post on TikTok? Could you raise your hand? So maybe 10 people about, okay. Now again, I'm not saying you have to do this. People have this belief that TikTok is like for teenagers. That is not true. That was true in 2018 and a little bit of 2019. That is no longer true. It is the most downloaded app on the planet. Most downloaded app on the planet. But I want you to start where you're comfortable. You know, if this, you know, if what I just said means nothing to you, that's perfectly fine. You know, if you're like, oh, I would never do that, that's okay. That's perfectly fine. One of the ways that you can get around doing things, because TikTok, you're essentially forced to make video. It's a video platform. Instagram is a little bit different, where if you're not somebody that's comfortable with making video content, there are ways to get around it. This is what I wanted to show you about guides. This is the feature on Instagram that a lot of people don't know about. And the Coldwell Banker Elite VA channel has guides on it also if you want to see real estate examples. Obviously, these are marketing examples. But it creates another, and now not everybody has this feature, so you'll have to look and see if you can add it. In Instagram, there's a little plus sign on the top right, and you click on that. There should be an option that says guides. If not, then you just don't have the feature. If that's you, send me an email and I can maybe help you get access to it. But this is essentially a blog article. You know, so now you're taking a blog article from what you would normally post on something like a website, and you're meeting people halfway, right? So start where you're comfortable and start where people already are. Instagram already has millions of users. Your website maybe doesn't have millions of visitors, right? So start where the audience already is. And if you are somebody who's maybe writing content, or you like the idea of writing content, you should consider using this. It's simple, it's fun, it looks cool, and again, it positions you as a subject matter expert, because you're now putting content onto a platform in a way that the majority of people are not. Again, another way to just go above and beyond. I wanted to show you a couple examples. I did some research and I just found some people that I thought were doing a really good job as an agent of posting content on TikTok, okay? And I picked two very different styles that will apply to different people so that you see and just grasp that there are options. You don't have to be an influencer. You don't have to be somebody who's like, oh, I have a personal brand, you know, that's what I'm doing. You can be a totally normal person that uses this platform to your benefit of your business, okay? Now, this person, her name is Stevie. She's an influencer. That's what I would consider. So referring back to the first slide and that graph, she is what I would consider an influencer, all right? And these are what I think are the characteristics of that. She's often in front of the camera, like showing her face, which takes effort. She educates buyers and sellers on topics outside of her listings, right? She actually doesn't post a lot of her listings. She more so posts things about the market, and I'll just show you a couple quick examples. And I think she puts in a pretty substantial effort, and she posts 9 to 11 times per month based on what I could see. So not every day, but 9 to 11 times per month for this type of content is a pretty decent amount. These are some of the examples of content that she posts, right? So not showing, you know, videos and walkthroughs of properties, but more so talking about the problems that she solves as an agent, right? She likes doing it, clearly. She's familiar with it. That's her style. If you look at the bottom, these are the numbers of views that each of those videos have, right? So the question is your own ego, is your own pride stopping you from getting in front of more people? It's really the only question. Now, as an agent, you might look at this and be like, I would never do this. Or I don't even agree with doing this, or I don't like this, right? And that's okay. But this person's not letting it stop her from getting more business. On her profile, the total amount of likes she has on her posts are 2.4 million. So the market is showing her that the content is good. The market is showing her that they're interested in it. So the question is it up to you to determine what people like, or is it up to the people to tell you what they like? Right? So you not putting yourself out there is the biggest obstacle between you ever figuring that out or not. Now again, that's not me saying you have to do this, but it's just showing how this one person's interpretation of how they use their strengths and what they like to do is added on top of their real estate business, right? So the other two examples is she has one that says, there's no such thing as a bad market. This is like a provoking thought, right? And in that video, she explains her thoughts and her opinion on it. And then the last one is considering monthly mortgage costs. And what she talks about in that video is, hey, if you're pre-approved for X, it doesn't mean you should always buy at that number, right? And here's why. And so she explained these things, and she's appealing to a certain market, which most likely is first-time home buyers. She's young, these people align with her. These could be millennials, these could be new families, right? So this is her way of using TikTok to get in front of those people. And even if they're not in her local market, she's now amassed 100,000 people who essentially are interested in what she has to say. So that has now created social proof for when she does meet somebody in her local market, she now does absolutely have an advantage over another agent that her potential client could work with. Does that make sense? So here's a different example, kind of a different style. This is what I would probably consider like a thought leadership type of profile. They are a verified profile, 3.3 million followers, 50 million likes, right? And their content doesn't show their face at all. It's not a person on video. It's literally just walkthroughs of beautiful homes. Now, of course, they have the benefit of showing homes that cost millions and millions of dollars, so that's obviously a challenge in itself. But again, I just want you to interpret this in your own way and think about, does this give me any ideas of how I could implement this in my own business? So again, doesn't show face. This uses very simple trends. It's not like heavy video editing. Like these are iPhone videos, okay? This is simple stuff. Again, luxury upscale properties, but my opinion is that I think this takes minimal effort and they actually don't post as much as the person that I just showed you. So it's not always about volume of content, and that's why I put that here. So these are the types of videos that they post, and I just picked 3 random examples. One was a really cool property that had a beautiful backyard. One was obviously a pretty beautiful house in the middle, 2.6 million views. And then the last one was a holiday post where they took their listing and just found a clever way to make it relative to the time of year and make it visually appealing, but at the same time showing off their listing. All by just either finding a friend or a family or someone they knew to dress up as Santa, or maybe even spending a little bit of money and hiring like a real rental Santa, right? Are you willing to put that time and effort into creating content? Obviously this person is, right? Because they didn't start like this, they started somewhere. TikTok has only been around for so long. So it's not like they just did this and all of a sudden got to where they're at. This is a consistent effort over time. They may not have spent as much time and money and effort in the very beginning.